This is a violation of the HOA rules. You cannot have this structure here.
This is my land, lady.
You have no right to be on this property. I've already called the police.
Ma'am, this is my land.
We'll see about that.
I had finally returned to my mountain cabin after years of planning and restoring the property. It was peaceful, private, and completely outside the HOA neighborhood next door. The subdivision had grown closer over the years, and its HOA had become increasingly interested in my property. I never expected their attention to turn into a confrontation. I pointed toward the clearly marked private property sign. Karen looked at it, but instead of leaving, she reached for a phone. She told the dispatcher that there was a property dispute and asked for deputies to come immediately. I decided not to argue and simply waited for the authorities to arrive. A few minutes later, 2 sheriff vehicles appeared at the end of the driveway. Karen looked confident, while I simply waited for the deputies to hear both sides. The deputies approached professionally and asked everyone to explain what had happened. Karen immediately started describing the property as if it belonged to her HOA. Karen claimed the cabin violated the neighborhood's authority and insisted the deputies make me stop using the property. The deputies did not take sides and asked me for my documentation. I went inside and returned with the original property documents showing the legal ownership of the land. Karen's expression changed the moment she saw the deed in my hand. The deputy carefully reviewed the deed and compared the property description with the information from complaint. The mood on the driveway became noticeably quieter. The property map showed something Karen apparently had never understood. My cabin sat on a separate parcel with its own legal boundaries. Karen stared at the documents, then looked toward the cabin as if seeing the property differently for the first time. Her certainty was disappearing fast. The deputies verified the parcel information through official county records. There was no confusion about who owned the land. The deputies explained an HOA could not simply claim authority over property outside its legal boundaries. Karen became visibly uncomfortable. Then the deputy asked Karen why she believed the HOA had authority over my parcel. She struggled to give a clear answer. Karen pulled out her own HOA documents, hoping they would support her claim. Instead, the paperwork only reinforced the difference between her subdivision and my parcel. The deputies walked the boundary area with me and confirmed the parcel separation. My cabin was exactly where the legal records said it was. Karen finally understood that the land had never belonged to the HOA. She had mistaken being nearby for having authority. The deputies explained that the dispute was a civil property matter, not an emergency. They advised everyone to rely on official records and proper legal channels. Karen stood silently looking at the cabin she had tried to control. For the first time, she seemed to understand that it was simply someone else's private property. After everything was clarified, the deputies prepared to leave. There was no dramatic arrest, just a clear explanation of the property boundaries. Karen gave me one final look before getting into her SUV. Whatever confidence she arrived with was completely gone. The sheriff vehicles disappeared down the mountain road. I finally had the quiet cabin back. Karen drove away without another argument. This time, she knew exactly where the HOA's authority ended. I walked back toward my cabin as the sun dropped behind the mountains. The confrontation was over, but I had learned an important lesson about knowing your property rights. I placed the deed back in its secure document box. Having the right paperwork had turned a heated argument into a simple matter of facts. By nightfall, everything was quiet again. The cabin felt like home instead of the center of someone else's dispute. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch and looked across the land I had worked so hard to preserve. Nothing had changed except my appreciation for knowing exactly what I owned. The lesson was simple. Boundaries matter. And so, does knowing the fact behind them. If someone claims control over your property, make sure the documents, not assumptions, tell the story. Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from.